Hollywood, I know you must hear this a lot lately, but it's time to get some original ideas. Because this business of constantly trying to revive classic franchises with inferior remakes and sequels that no one was asking for, it's not a good look. It hardly ever works, and having just seen it, I don't think this movie is going to be the one to buck that trend. In Terminator Dark Fate, a young girl's life is changed forever when a robot from a post-apocalyptic future travels back in time to kill her, and she has to rely on a protector sent by the human resistance to save her and stop this thing in order to ensure humanity's survival. But wait, you ask, isn't that just the plot of the original Terminator movie? Yes. Yes, it is. I did not have high hopes for this movie. The trailers weren't promising, excitement for this franchise just isn't there anymore, and if James Cameron wasn't going to direct it himself, then I really wish they just hadn't bothered. That was my mentality as I sat down to watch this thing. And I'll give the movie this much: it doesn't embarrass itself. Dark Fate is probably the best Terminator movie since T2. But consider what that means when every Terminator movie since T2 has been crap, so the bar isn't terribly high anymore. And even if they reach the bar, that doesn't mean what it used to. They wisely avoided some of the problems of the other sequels by taking a back-to-basics approach and not getting too fancy with it, so what we get is a pretty simple, straightforward story that doesn't shoot itself in the foot by trying to do too much or get too complicated. In that sense, it's very reminiscent of T1 and T2. And in some ways, that is refreshing. The problem is, it's so reminiscent of them that it quickly becomes derivative. All the story beats are copied and pasted from the first two movies. If you've seen them, you've seen this one. But when you make a movie like that, you're just inviting comparisons to the first two films, and when you compare them, Dark Fate does not hold up. And that's not an easy spot to be in. T1 is outstanding, and T2 is one of the best action movies ever made. Following that, Dark Fate is competent, but completely uninspired. It's a mixed bag across the board. The action scenes are fairly decent when they're not swapping out every human being in them for CG replicas, but that's exactly what they do about 85% of the time. Remember when the trailers started coming out and we all noted how bad the CG'd actors looked, and we hoped the effects weren't finished yet and they were still working on them? They weren't. That was the final version. They CG the actors a lot. It's really, really obvious, and it looks so damn fake it takes you out of the movie every single time. And the bad effects don't stop there. There are a lot of green screen shots during scenes in the future, and they're all pretty regrettable. I don't know why they didn't just shoot these things at night. That might have covered up at least some of the problem, but they don't. Visually, there's nothing special about this movie at all. I feel a bit more positive about the cast, though. Linda Hamilton showed up for work. I thought she at least did Sarah Connor justice and performed as well as the movie and the script would allow her to. Arnold is fine, though he is looking noticeably tired these days. His role isn't huge, and I don't particularly like what they did with it, but he could have and has done worse as the T-800. Even if the twist with his character was spoiled in the trailers, and that doesn't do him any favors. But the new cast are the question marks here. Of that group, Mackenzie Davis is easily the best. I thought her physicality was believable, and she performed the action well. Again, when she wasn't being swapped out for a CG double, which happens way too often, and she had the most meat on her character. She does have this Kyle Reese vibe to her, of someone who grew up in a really bad place and has been through a lot of shit. Now, is she as good as Michael Biehn was back in the day? Hell no. But I liked her performance for the most part. Gabriel Luna? Look, the dude is a good actor, but he has nothing to work with here. There's nothing remotely memorable about his character, the Rev 9. It looks completely generic. It has a new ability in that it can be in two places at once, but the movie never really takes advantage of this or does anything unique or special with it. And outside of that, the Rev 9 really doesn't do anything that the T-1000 couldn't have done. And if we're talking comparisons, oh my god, the liquid metal morphing effects for the T-1000 back in T2 looked so much better than they do here, it's not even funny. And Rev 9 is easily the biggest victim of the CG body swapping. It's so excessive with him that I honestly question whether the actor was ever even on set. But the real problem is the girl. The actress is serviceable enough, I guess, though really unconvincing as an action heroine. But what kills the movie is her storyline. I won't spoil it, but I don't have to. People have been predicting this since the first trailer dropped, and it's exactly what we all thought it was. The filmmakers really didn't anticipate just how predictable this was going to be, because when the movie finally explains what her deal is, they play it off like some big shocker. But if you didn't see it coming from 100 miles away, you were watching the movie with your eyes closed. It might have been a clever and progressive twist back in like 1995, but now it's just eye-roll worthy, and comes off like they're conforming to Hollywood's current year narrative because they're terrified of being politically incorrect and thought getting woke was a safer way to go. It's not a twist anymore, guys. It's not surprising. In 2019, it's the most predictable thing you could have possibly done with this movie. And to make matters worse, this girl is the linchpin of the entire story, and she has the most underwritten role in the whole movie. Most of it ends up being about Mackenzie Davis and Linda Hamilton, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing because they're the most engaging people on the screen, but we barely get to know the character around which this entire story is supposed to revolve. In the scene where they explain who this girl really is and why she's so important, it's all Mackenzie and Linda, and the girl barely says a damn word. We never really get to know what she thinks or feels about this situation. We never see her just taking a moment to be flabbergasted that a robot from the future has been sent to kill her, or how the fate of humanity is suddenly resting on her shoulders, so the character just feels like a walking plot device a lot of the time. And the result is that towards the end, when she has her Sarah Connor-esque woman up moment, and she starts taking charge and giving orders, it just feels like bullshit. You didn't earn this. When Sarah Connor's big moment came in Terminator 1, it was great because they did the character work to organically get her to that point. But here, the girl is saying things, trying to act tough and be the hero, and I'm not buying it at all because the journey getting her there was just not crafted well, and it's like, sweetie, I know you're doing your best, but you're no Sarah Connor, and you're surrounded by characters who are infinitely more qualified to be doing what you're doing. Just go sit down and let the adults handle this. Not the actress's fault, really, but the storytelling just doesn't treat her character with the care it needed. She also has easily the worst line in the film. You'll know it when you hear it. I cringed in my seat so hard, it was bad. So, not shockingly, the story is the major issue here. And the biggest crime of all, it hobbles the entire movie in the first scene. Right out of the gate, they do something that completely, callously, throws away what the first two movies meant, trivializes all the lore and the mythology of those films, T2 especially, and later when they try to bring it back and invoke the mantra and central theme of the originals, there's no fate but what we make for ourselves, to drum up some cheap pathos, it feels like a slap in the face because they just proved that wasn't true. What they did at the beginning completely shits all over that. You can't treat the originals so dismissively and then use them to tug on our heartstrings later. That's just cheap and manipulative, and I'd like to think that most moviegoers are smart enough not to fall for this. So they're trying to have their cake and eat it too here. But the only way that happens is if you eat the cake and then throw it back up, leaving you with soggy, vomit-covered chunklets of what you had before. And it seems like that's what they wound up with here. It might kind of, sort of look and taste like what you had originally, but it's just not nearly as good. Terminator Dark Fate is probably a step up from the last three sequels in this franchise, but not because the quality has improved that much. More like because it avoids being bad in some of the ways those movies were bad. And that does count for something, but in trying to take the franchise back to its roots, they just ended up regurgitating a lot of what the first two movies did, and it wasn't nearly as interesting this time around. And worst of all, the very first thing it does is desecrate what made T1 and T2 work in the first place. I wasn't very forgiving of it after that. Even the movie's rating feels like a bit of a sham. This isn't a rated R movie, this is a PG-13 movie with F-bombs. Still, the new cast is fairly capable, even if that's mostly referring to Mackenzie Davis and the others aren't used very well, and they did at least do us the courtesy of retconning T3, Salvation, and Genesis, meaning that we've traded 3 bad Terminator sequels for one that's just okay. But if they really wanted to reinvigorate the audience's interest in the Terminator, just okay is not gonna cut it. And if they couldn't manage to blow us away with this franchise even when James Cameron was back on board, maybe it's time they just stop trying. Let me know what you thought of this review in the comments section. Ding that bell icon and follow me on Twitter using the link in the description box so you'll always know when new videos get uploaded. And don't forget to support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing, because the real Terminator is the YouTube algorithm. Do all the things, and I'll be back soon with more videos. Over. Out.